All right, we're officially recording our very first episode of the Comics Run the World podcast. I am Mateo, aka Orion Scott Comics, over on Twitter, Instagram, and especially on TikTok. And I'm joined by.
I'm Woody, also known as Frankie. I stream on Twitch. I stream a lot of video games, but I hit up. Now, do you want me to call you Orion, or do you want me to call you
You can call me Orion. That's fine.
Orion? I hit you up on Twitter. We actually really don't know each other. We're just meeting, which I think is going to be kind of fun for the podcast. But yeah, I hit you up because I've been wanting to talk comics. I think it's there's a lot of people that talk comic book movies and stuff like that, but I don't know. I just thought it'd be really fun to talk comic book stories, and we can still talk about the movies and whatnot. But yeah,
I agree. I feel like this is like almost unprecedented of just like two like random people like it's like, hey, you want to start a podcast? I'm like, all right, yeah, let's do it, and like just like done based off of that. So I think it's gonna be very interesting and really fun. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about mainly just comic book stuff, both Marvel, DC, Independence. We'll dabble into comic book movies, TV shows, video games, whatnot. But with that being said, I want to ask you, how do you start getting into comics?
So the thing that like got me into comics was the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie back in the day. I saw that movie, pretty much fell in love instantly, and I started reading them when my mom would go shop at Barnes & Noble. I would go run off. I just saw like Spider-Man and just ran over, and then so it became a tradition where every time she would go, I would just go there and sit and read, and then eventually she bought me some. And over time, just kept reading. I've fallen like in and out of comics a lot throughout my life. Like, just like stuff gets in the way, school, whatever, work, whatever gets in the way. But the thing that really there was two things that really brought me back. It was Infinity War when that released. I got hard into it for like a good while, and then I fell off. But then the one that like it's ever since I've seen it, it's got me back into comics, and I haven't gotten out, is Spider-Verse. Ever since I saw that, I went back to reading comics, and I haven't stopped since.
Awesome.
So yeah. What about you?
So mine's kind of lengthy because also when I was a kid, I also loved Spider-Man. I also loved Batman. But the group that I loved the most, it wasn't like the X-Men or anything like that, as like most people would. I actually really loved like the Fantastic Four. I love the original, like the early 2000s movies, Fantastic Four and Rise of the Silver Surfer. I still watch them today. I still get a kick out of them. I think they're great, even though they're like not that faithful to like the comics and like it's goofy, but I still enjoy it for what it is. But I guess like the first comics I've read were like the Calvin and Hobbes and like Garfield comic strips. I read that like a lot.
Dude, I didn't even really think of that when putting this together. The first comics I read were Garfield. I have them back home. Last time I went back home, I was looking through them. So actually, technically, Garfield would be my first. So yeah.
Yeah, and like the way I even got started, like I even started reading like those type of comics, like with Garfield and Calvin Hobbes. Like I used to have this like dictionary. It was like a Garfield dictionary. It's like this like the same format as like a dictionary, but like in every like several chunks of like pages, there's like a random Garfield comic strip like on the top of the page, and like I'll like, just flip through the dictionary, just read those Garfield comics, and then I stepped up to like getting like the whole collected editions of both Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes. And from then on there, I always wanted to get into comics, and I really didn't up until 2013 because I've always had this like really like this like fear of like saying like, oh yeah, I read comics, because at least back in the day, if you read comics, you're kind of like, a loser or a nerd or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. I was like I really want to get into this, but I don't know. I don't see like, I just don't want to be perceived as that. But then like I saw Man of Steel when that first came out in theaters, and I was blown away. I was like 13 at the time, and I watched it, and I was like, this is like fantastic. And then I watched it like 3 more times in the theaters. But then like the week after I watched it, I think around like the first or second time, I went to my local comic book shop and I picked up 2 comic books, which were Batman Hush and Superman Unchained by Scott Snyder.
Okay.
And I read those both, and I thought they were great. I reread Hush last year, and I didn't. I was very much let down because I didn't like Hush as much as I did when I first read it. But yeah, ever since then, I mean, like you said, I've been on again, off again with comic books. But then, what was it? Ever since like I would agree, like ever since Infinity War, I've been just like on a huge consistency of like reading, collecting comic books, and just like going deep into like different like more niche comic books, like different like areas of genres within like the comic book medium, and like I've been like such like a big fan of like all of it essentially.
Yeah, yeah. Infinity War was big for me. I was like, whoa, like I need to start reading comics again. Like,
Yeah,
I read the miniseries, the original one, Infinity War, and I was
yeah.
like, then I started getting to like event comics because I had never really read a lot of event comics, and I was like, wait, I should read Civil War because I love the movie Civil War, so I went and read Civil War. Didn't like it, but yeah, and then I kind of got off again. But ever since Spider-Verse, I immediately read Ultimate Spider-Man after all of it after Spider-Verse.
So good. I love Ultimate Spider-Man.
Then I was just like, okay, I'm not falling back out of this again. Like I can't let it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. So with that being said, our introductions, how we got into comic books, how long we've been reading. Did you want to start off with some hot takes you have?
Some hot takes.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got one that's about comic books and one that's about some comic book movies. Which one do you want to hear first?
Two comic book movies, because a lot of people, I think there'll be a lot more people would find conflict to find in like whatever hot take you got.
I know this one. Both will have a lot of pushback, but
Okay.
I think from start to finish, the best superhero trilogy is the MCU Spider-Man with Tom Holland.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think it's the best trilogy. And I know the immediate one people are going to think of is the Dark Knight trilogy.
Right.
That's going to be the one. And I think, unbiased, I think the Dark Knight is the best comic book movie. Like, it's not my favorite. It's probably my second favorite, but I don't like Batman Begins. Really, almost at all. I really don't like that movie. I actually love The Dark Knight Rises a lot, but I think I love all of the MCU Spider-Man movies. And that's another thing I'll eventually talk about is I really just like change in comics. Like when stuff, that's one reason I love Ultimate Spider-Man. Like it's different. There's a lot different about Ultimate Spider-Man than like, the canon Spider-Man in the 616. So I don't know. I love him. Like Iron Man basically being like, why am I blanking out?
Like his mentor, essentially.
Yeah, Uncle Ben. I love him being Uncle Ben, and I just obviously No Way Home. Like, it's not, it's got Toby, it's got Andrew. That one speaks for itself. But Mysterio is my favorite comic book villain of all time, and I loved their take on him. Homecoming, I just think, is one of the most rewatchable comic book movies ever. It's just so much fun to watch. It's just a fun movie to watch. So yeah, that's
awesome.
I don't think many people agree with that, but
I mean, like, I think a lot of people would like. I hear a lot of pushback with like Far From Home, how everyone says like that's like one of like the worst Spider-Man movies or whatever. But I personally don't see that. It's not my favorite, but like I don't see like why people have like such like a negative like.
I don't either. I actually think like it's really hard to judge No Way Home against really any other movie because it is a fan service movie, but I don't think that is a negative. Like people say that as a negative, but I don't really think so. I think it's also a good movie on its own, but I think Far From Home is the best movie in the trilogy.
No, really? I agree.
I have some bias because I love Mysterio, but I still think that like Peter just goes through such an interesting arc in the movie, and it's him dealing with Tony's death, and
right.
Yeah, I just think I love that movie so much. I haven't rewatched it as much as Homecoming, but I think it's the best of the trilogy.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people say like how like one of the like the good qualities of like the Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy movies is that like not a single movie is like his origin story. It's like all three movies. It's basically his like entire like arc and origin story of him becoming Spider-Man. Because a lot of people say like he's not really Spider-Man because he has like all this tech. He has a lot of help from Tony. But like yeah, that might be true. Like he gets help from Tony, but like just like that like Tony had being like the parental figure for Spider-Man, I always liked a lot.
Yeah.
And just him losing all of that, and not only losing Tony, but losing his whole life at the end of No Way Home, and then him making his own suit, living in a crappy apartment. People want Spider-Man to be as miserable as possible, and they're happy.
Have a terrible life.
Exactly, and it's like that. The whole arc of like all the three movies, I think just like it works very well, especially with like Mysterio basically setting the catalyst of like a portion of like the multiverse happening because of like Spider-Man wants to have his identity erased from everyone's mind, but then he messes up the spell, and that spell, you know, has like universes meshing into each other. So
yeah,
I just love. I agree. Like it's like I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, in the original script, Mysterio was supposed to kill Aunt May.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I found that out the other day, actually.
Wow, that would have been crazy.
But yeah, I mean, that's one of my hot takes. What do you got?
All right, I'm gonna start off with a comic book movie hot take that I know I've said it so many times, and I always get like flack for it, and I always think it's funny. But I think Batman vs Superman, the Ultimate Edition, is like top 3 comic book movies ever.
I actually like. We've somewhat talked about this. I have.
Yeah.
Man of Steel is my favorite comic book movie ever. And I just like both really love that movie and really hate that movie. So let me tell you what I hate about it, and you can give me your opinion.
Okay.
There is a lot that I love about the movie, like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I love it more than most. I hate Lex Luthor. Hate a lot. What is your thought on Lex Luthor in that movie?
I do. I understand like why people don't like Lex Luthor, and just like his like casting like of all people like Jesse Eisenberg as like Lex Luthor, but like for me it's like not only just like in Batman vs Superman, but it's like in general. I just love like different iterations of characters. I'm not gonna like all of them because there are some that are gonna be poorly done, and in some cases a lot of people might think that even though it's a different take on Lex Luthor, Jesse Eisenberg didn't do a good job. I thought for what was given and like just like the whole like his plan and the plot of the story, I enjoyed Jesse Eisenberg's different iteration of Lex Luthor. I do like all that there's like spasms and like his like quirks and stuff like that. I didn't really understand, but like just like his character, his like motivation that like he like basically tells Superman at the top of like the landing pad for the helicopter, like it kind of just like all like spills out on like why he's doing all this. And
I kind of like that part. I'll agree with that. I kind of like that part.
And I kind of just like I don't know. I enjoyed it a lot, but I can understand why people hated it, and I can be okay if like obviously it's gonna happen anyways. But like just saying like in the past before all this like James Gunn rebooting stuff happened. If they had Jesse Eisenberg cast Lex Luthor for Batman Superman and casted someone else for like I don't know, just recasting, I wouldn't mind at all. But for what it is in the movie, I enjoy what Lex Luthor was and what Jesse Eisenberg brought to the table.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I love about that movie. I love everything with Clark and Bruce, like all their interactions. I love it. I love the way Wonder Woman is introduced. I kind of hate Lois Lane in that movie, and I think the thing I hate the most is how early they killed off Superman. And like I know he's gonna come back, I get that, but I don't know. He was like the Iron Man of the DCU. He started it with Man of Steel. He was, and he's way more iconic, obviously, than Iron Man. He's Superman. So I think that moment needs to be almost like Iron Man's death. It took him 10 years, maybe not 10, because I'm okay with like 5, 6, whatever. But yeah, I just think it was too soon.
Yeah. I agree. Superman's death, like, it's just like just like the one of like the issues I have is like them like meshing two of the most iconic stories of like the two most iconic characters, like with Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, and Superman, the death of Superman. Them like combining those two into one movie. That was kind of like a flaw that I have too. And with Doomsday, I feel like they could have had like a different villain, because I know they had like concept art for like Metallo actually being the final like boss fight, if you will,
I
for
didn't
the
know that.
movie. It was like the guy in the wheelchair was gonna be Metallo essentially, and like
Really?
yeah, that was like the like one of the original ideas of like having him instead of like being blown up in the congressional hearing. He would have like this mech suit essentially, and just like be Metallo and just, like fight both Batman and Superman essentially.
That's wild. I did not know that at
Yeah,
all. I had no idea.
I honestly would have preferred that, because I mean I can go I can go all about like the what ifs and like the scrap possibilities and like the lore of like the Zack Snyder movies of like the DCU, because I'm a big fan, and I understand some criticisms, and like I'm not the one who to be like restore the Snyderverse, sell the Snyderverse to Netflix or like anything like that. I'm like, yeah, it's over. Yeah, I moved on. I'm excited to see what James Gunn's doing. But like just go, I'm just like I was just like engulfed with like everything, because like I was like I make sure, like the release of Snyder Cut campaign, I was like following everything that was going like leading up to like the actual release of the movie, and it's like I understand like the criticisms, especially with like Batman Superman. I know a lot of people don't like it because it's not what they envisioned these characters to be, but like this like I appreciate this iteration of like the characters, and it's different. It's darker, yeah, but you can really see like the character development that they both do within like the trilogy of the Zack Snyder movies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a hot take. I'll say for another day. I'll say that one. I'll say that one. I guess I'll go ahead with my second hot take. This one's comic book one. Have you read
Yeah.
The Vision by Tom King?
I have not. It's like one of my to be read list right now, but I have not read it.
Well, I really don't like it.
Oh, really?
And that's a comic book that like it seemingly everyone loves. I haven't met anyone else that dislikes it.
Oh,
Like
really? Yeah,
ever.
yeah. I hear a lot of praise about Vision. I haven't gotten around to it, but there's very few people who, or any people at all. I never seen anyone like talk negatively about that comic book series. So that is
I think
interesting take.
we should definitely read it at some point because
Okay,
it's I think it's 12 issues.
I think so.
And I'd like to revisit it because a lot of the times with stuff like that, when it's that popular and I dislike it that much, I'm like, there's something wrong with like I need to, there's something wrong with me. So
Yeah.
what I took from it, like the reasons I didn't like it was Tom King. At least I haven't read a lot of his stuff, but he does this like narration style. He has a lot of these narration bubbles, which I know all
Okay.
comics do, but the way he writes it is just so like cryptic. And I was like, dude, what do you like? Just say what you're trying
Yeah.
to say. I don't know.
I completely
And
understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
I remember he's going on about like E equals MC squared or something, and I was like, what? What? Are you? But it has a really unique story, and like to a degree, I did like it. I heard such high praise that I guess my expectations were too high, or the art's decent. I need to. We're definitely gonna reread that one, and I'm gonna
Okay.
maybe I'll hate it even more. Who knows? We'll have to
Yeah.
find out. But yeah, that's my second hot take.
Yeah, and just like to bounce off like what you said with the narration parts of it, how it's like, cryptic. I do understand that part because I don't know if you read his Mr. Miracle miniseries.
No,
It's
I've read a
basically
little
like
of this. I've read a little of this Batman.
Mhm.
I had somebody in my LCS recommend it, and I read like the first issue, and I was like, don't like it. But what were you saying about the Mr. Miracle?
So it's very much like how you said, like it's cryptic, especially towards the end. Because I read it 3 times, The ending, I still don't understand. It's like you have to really interpret I think it's like an open ended like ending. It's like the way you interpret it. It it's kind of frustrating, but I also like having like that like aspect of like an ending where you can make it your own. Like you can interpret it the way you can interpret it. But then again, I want to know like what is actually happening. I want to know like what's going on here. So
I'm
yeah, I
kind of the
understand
same
like
way.
that, Kristen.
I like cryptic every now and then, but when it gets too cryptic, I'm like, all right,
Right.
I don't know what you're saying.
All right.
But yeah,
So I guess
what's your
my hot
second one?
take. I have a few, but I get a lot of flack for this one. The Dark Knight Returns. I think it is super overrated, and
Dark Knight
I don't
Rises,
think
like the third one.
like the comic book, The Dark Knight Returns.
Oh, the
The Frank
comic
Miller
book,
one.
The Dark Knight
Yeah.
Returns. I thought we were still talking about movies. You're talking
No,
about okay, Frank Miller.
Yeah.
Frank Miller, Dark Knight Returns.
I think it's overrated, and I think it's like not far from like the best comic book, but it's definitely not the best Batman book out there. Yeah.
I've read like the first two issues. I did the same thing with Spider-Man. Also, Spider-Man Life Story. I came in with the wrong expectations, but I did the same thing with Dark Knight Returns. I read the first two issues and I was like, "Whoa, I don't like this," and I feel bad for not liking it. And
Right.
I was like, "So I'm going to come back to it." So I think I agree with what you're saying, but I need to fully read it. But why didn't you? Why'd you find it overrated?
I mean, like, it's just like the story's good. Like, don't get me wrong, the story was good. I like the artwork. I like Frank Miller's artwork, and I like in that aspect. I know his like art is like super like crazy now, but I enjoyed the artwork and just like the different storylines I was told in the Dark Knight Returns. But again, it's just like a lot of people praise that to be like the best of the best Batman story, and I was like, no, it's not.
Yeah,
Because I did like I saw online there's like the Batman reading checklist, where it's like a bunch of Batman comic books that you like Batman fans have to read essentially.
that one's
And
always on there.
I always found like I found 4 comics that were better than the Dark Knight Returns. I loved No Man's Land, Nightfall, Prey, Year One, Long Halloween. Those are like great Batman stories that I feel like are better than Dark Knight Returns. I just, like it's overblown essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I need to fully read it to, I guess, fully agree with you, but I've read enough Batman to where I'm probably going to agree. Like, I might end up liking The Dark Knight Returns, but from what I read, I love the paneling. I thought that was really cool. Like,
yeah,
but I might be the same. It might not really be for me, but I'll have to read that soon and get back to you. And
yeah.
let
I
you
was
know.
planning on rereading it because the second time I read it was like maybe like 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago. So I might just have to reread it again to like fully solidify like my take on it because as of like the first 2 times I was like over like it's overrated. There's
just
so many
like the
better
Vision,
comic books.
just like the Vision. We'll read it. Read it on here. Like, yeah. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about it. Have you read Spider-Man Life Story?
I did, yes.
I came in, I think it's similar to The Dark Knight Returns. I came in with just way different expectations for that one. Like, I didn't know really what it was about, and it threw me off so bad, I put it away, and I was like, I'm going to just, come back. Because sometimes expectations, I think, can spoil stuff. So that's what I did with The Dark Knight Returns. So we'll read on here and get our thoughts.
Yeah, we can cement our opinions on both Vision and Dark Knight Returns.
Sounds good. Next, did you want to go talk about some of our favorite characters? We decided on top 3.
Yeah, let's do it.
Top 3 combo characters. This is going to be easy for me because, like I was telling you before, I wrote out my top 10, but my top 3 will never change. Like, I think my other characters are interchangeable, so I'm glad we picked top 3. But what's your number 3?
Oh, my number 3. So my list always changes depending on what I read. Because like I don't know why, but like for example, like I just read Beta Ray Bell by Daniel Warren Johnson, and that was we'll talk about it later, but that was a phenomenal book, and I loved it. So now Beta Ray Bill's like on like
Yeah.
high on my list. So I always it's like fluid. It always fluctuates. But there are three characters that I do love, and for my third, I have to go with Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern.
Okay. Good pick. I like it.
I just think he's like, because he did have two volumes, Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern Volume 1 and 2. Basically, it's like how he became a Green Lantern, and just like his path to becoming Green Lantern. Some little one shots, little small stories. I just think it's like very interesting how he became a Green Lantern, because during the time of like the Green Lantern comic books, Hal Jordan was like instantly become crazy, starts killing off all of the Green Lanterns, and one of the Guardians of the Universe comes down to Kyle Rayner as he stumbles out of a bar drunk, and says like, "You have to be the one to help us," essentially. And Kyle's like, "What?" And just like his whole like journey from being like he's like reckless, immature, like doesn't take anything seriously character, and becoming one of like the best, most creative Green Lanterns on the roster. It's just I thought it was very interesting, and it's very controversial too how he became more mature, because there's like spoilers are ahead if anyone hasn't read it yet. But this villain called Major Force goes into his apartment and kills his girlfriend and stuffs her in a fridge. So that's kind of like
what comic is that in?
That's in the first volume of Kyle Rayner Green Lantern. I forgot what I don't remember what issue it is, but
I gotta read that.
That does happen early on in it, and that was very controversial because it started the term called fridging, basically having the female love interest being either tortured, killed, beaten up, or whatever, having some negative thing inflicted onto the female love interest of the main hero, and that being the driving force for the main hero to become better. And that was like a whole thing. But then later on, he progresses and becomes like such like a great, unique character. Very creative. He loves like comic books, anime, like all this type of stuff. So like he's basically like one of us if we ever get Green Lantern ring. If we get Green Lantern ring, we'll create all the things we see in Marvel and DC. I think he's cool, and I feel like I can relate to him in some aspects of his character.
Yeah, it's cool. I haven't read a lot of comics with him in it. I've read a little bit of JLA with Grant Morrison, but I need to read the whole thing. Yeah, good pick. I'm hoping to see some Green Lantern announced tomorrow.
I know. Oh my god!
I really hope so. My number 3 is Ghost Rider. I don't really have a specific. It's probably Danny Ketch if I had to pick a specific Ghost Rider, but really just Ghost Rider in general. I've just always found him really badass. Ghost Rider, like, even though there's 2 characters above him, obviously he's at 3. If I read a Ghost Rider story, I almost always like it. Like, with the characters ahead of me, like, I might read a story and I'd be like Spider-Man, I got his shirt on, spoilers, but
yeah.
he's Spider-Man Life Story, didn't like it. But whenever I read a Ghost Rider story, I almost always love it. Like, you really can't go wrong. Cosmic Ghost Rider might be my favorite. Okay. I know that's Frank Castle, so he's not really, Danny Ketch or Johnny Blaze, but still, it's just such a fun story. I guess, I don't know what I would say my favorite Ghost Rider story is. It might be the 90s Danny Ketch, but he's just such a badass character, It's always a fun time reading any story he's in.
I mean, funny enough, I haven't read any Ghost Rider comic books as of yet, but now, since you mention it, I might just have to now.
Yeah, we'll definitely have some segments where I feel like we'll focus on characters, stuff like that, and I'll throw out some reading recommendations. I think the most fun one by far is Cosmic Ghost Rider. It's just a really, really, really fun read.
I mean, it looks fun too. Like the artwork looks great.
That's another thing about Ghost Rider. The art, no matter who's doing the art, it's just always fun to look at the page. Like Ghost Rider, just in hell, wherever. It's just always a fun time reading Ghost Rider comics. So,
awesome. So if I check it out soon. All right. For my number 2, this it kind of switches sometimes, but now think about it, it's pretty solid. My number 2 is Doctor Fate.
Okay. I thought you were about to say, okay.
I love Doctor Fate, and it's like I remember seeing like the Doctor Strange movie and in theaters, and up until like that, watching Doctor Strange, I didn't really like any of like the Marvel movies that were like coming out. I was like, nah. And to be fair, I was being very biased back then. I was being super biased. I always think about that time where like I was like, yeah, I hate it because just because it's Marvel. Now I'm not gonna watch Marvel. I was like being super biased, and I was like, what was I doing? But then I saw Doctor Strange. I was like, yeah, this is like the one of the best like Marvel movies I've seen in like a long time. And then so like I started like looking into the character, and I saw like this guy who Doctor Strange was based off of was Doctor Fate. So I looked at him because he looked cooler. I thought he looked cool with like this golden helmet and his like
he does
and gold, like gloves, cape, all of it. And I was like,
objectively, he looks cooler. I don't even think you can make an argument.
No, it's not a contest. But he looks cool. And it's like his origin is interesting. It's kind of like similar to Moon Knight's too, where like Kent Nelson, archaeologist, goes to an Egyptian tomb or whatever, and he dies and gets resurrected as Dr. Fate, essentially, and becomes the host of Naboo, who's like, I think the Lords of Order, one of the Lords of Order, essentially. And he goes out, obviously fights against chaos and instills order. And it's interesting for like in that aspect because he's strictly on like, at least from what I've read, I don't know anything about now, but like from what I've read, is like strictly on order. And giving on your perspective of that, that could also make him more of like an anti-hero or villain, depending on the circumstances too. Yeah, which I think is very interesting. And like the fact that like Kent Nelson is like being possessed by the spirit of Naboo. He's like being controlled by Naboo and like all this stuff, which I think is like very unique and interesting. Also the fact that like how there's multiple people carrying the mantle of Dr. Fate. There's obviously Kent Nelson, was it Eric Strauss, and then two people were, I forget what the names were. It was like two people would come merge together and become Dr. Fate. There is this guy named Fate who literally just melts down the helmet and makes it into a dagger. Very 90s. It's like a super 90s. And there's the kid named Khaled who was Dr. Fate for a brief time in the New 52, I think. But just overall, I think the character is super interesting, super badass, he's super powerful. He's like one of the most powerful characters in DC. I just think it's like really cool. And like there's one story that I loved that was Countdown to Mystery Dr. Fate. All the issues were great up until, unfortunately, like the last issue, because the writer of the issue of the series unfortunately passed away before you could finish the series. So instead of like, having like no end or having just like one person tell the ending, there's like multiple endings to that story that like different people like wrote for, essentially based on like his notes and like how like the story was and like how they felt that this should end. Up until then, like I didn't like any of the endings they wrote, but like just like that initial storyline of like the first like 4 issues ish was phenomenal. I loved it. But yeah, that's basically why I love Dr. Fate. I think he's just cool, badass, looks cool, acts cool, is cool. So yeah.
Look, that's usually the way I first get into a character is if they look cool. I mean, it's shallow, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
So my first introduction to him was the Injustice 2 video game. Mm-hmm. I didn't know who he was before that. I think that'll also make this podcast really interesting is, I've read comics, you've read comics, but there's so much that I haven't read that will be fun to like read for the first time and discuss on here.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's a good pick. I like it.
Awesome.
You'll have to give me, besides that one you just mentioned, I'll need some Dr. Fate recommendations.
You got it.
My number 2 is Superman.
Okay. Nice.
Now, what's like funny about Superman, out of the 3, he's the one I've read by far the least of. I really actually haven't read that much Superman. My love for Superman comes from my dad. He was just the biggest Superman fan in the world. I still remember going to see Man of Steel with him. It was like one of my core experiences. One of my core memories was seeing Man of Steel in theaters with him, and we were just both like
Yeah,
blown away.
Mm.
He's just like, I think he's the most inspiring maybe character ever, like for me personally. Yeah, that I can think of. I'm really trying to think, but so yeah, I mean, I love the Injustice games. It's obviously a very different take, and I think it's kind of messed up Superman storytelling and just in general. But I still love like the Injustice games. But Man of Steel, what's the Superman Returns? What's the guy? He's now in the DC shows. What
Brendan Routh, I think.
I saw that movie with him. I don't like it anymore, but I loved I loved that, watching that with my dad. So just the memories I've got with that, and I just find him like as a character so inspiring. There's my favorite like panel ever is in Superman Red and Blue. With him like looking at the Earth.
Yeah.
And
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So yeah, I need to read more Superman. Like that's the character I want to read the most of like this year, because there's just so much that I haven't read of Superman. But yeah, even without reading much of him, he's easily my number 2.
Yeah, and like what you said about him being the most inspirational ones, one of the most inspirational characters. I'm like, I read like a few Superman comic books last year, and I can easily say like that's like fact essentially. Like it's just like something about him. It's like then the stories he's like been in, especially like an All-Star Superman.
That's one that I have.
So good.
That one, it's a lot of the times I want to call it my favorite comic of all time. It's at least number 2, but I mean, that's probably the comic I like have reread the most. I love All-Star Superman.
Did you see the animated movie?
I have it on my watch list on HBO. I haven't seen it yet. Is it? I heard it has a different ending, or a somewhat different ending.
I don't remember.
I think it's something
different.
It's something with Lex Luthor. I think he does something different with Lex at the end than he does in the comic.
I think so. Yeah. Now I remember. I think so. Yeah. But mainly it's like the anime movie it's great. It does like adapting the comic book to the anime movie perfectly. They do like pick out like they do like exclude some things like where he goes to Bizarro World and all that stuff. They do exclude that part, but it's like the main core storyline of All-Star Superman they do very well, and the animation is really well done.
It's my favorite to reread because when I first read it, I loved it, but I didn't like the Bizarro World part.
Yeah.
But after rereads, I've liked it more and more each time. Like I kind of grow appreciation for it as I reread it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think this Grant Morrison does a really good job with Superman. Like
he does.
It's great. All right. So my number 1. It's probably obvious by now, given my name. But my number 1, it fluctuates between like the two people in my name. There's either Mr. Miracle or Orion of the New Gods. And I don't really remember how I got into the New Gods. I think it was because of the Justice League animated series.
Okay.
I just thought they were cool, like a concept, and I thought Orion looked really cool. I love Mr. Miracle. So then I liked them a lot when I was like more like my mid to early teens, and then I started actually reading like their like comics, and I remember picking up Mr. Miracle by Tom King issue by issue as it was coming out, and I was like more engulfed into the character of scot-free Mr. Miracle. And Orion also makes an appearance, and he does a really good job of being kind of like the anti Mr. Miracle, essentially, because he's like Orion's like this big a brooding, serious, like totalitarian figure towards Mr. Miracle, and he's harsh with Mr. Miracle, and like Mr. Miracle's like suffering through a lot, like PTSD, depression, all this stuff. And just like that whole story arc with Mr. Miracle, I thought I loved. It's like the whole story was really good. Well, Orion also had like he had an ongoing series a while back with Walt Simonson writing. I just finished book 1 of that last year. I thought it was great. And, I just think like Orion kind of reminds me of Achilles in like Greek mythology.
Okay.
He kind of reminds me of because he's like Orion's like this angry person, and like has like, and when he gets angry, he gets like super violent, it's like Achilles in like Greek mythology. Like he has like controls anger and stuff like that. And an interesting thing with not Mr. Miracle, but with Orion, like if he gets like super like out of control angry, he turns like more like monster esque, and like that's kind of like his, because like Orion's like the son of Darkseid essentially. He was raised, he was born of Darkseid, so like that Darkseid aspect of himself like kind of like emerges and like shows face. And I just think he's a very interesting character. He's like a warrior, he's a leader, and just him and Mr. Miracle being like complete, like almost like opposites, but yet working together and they're brothers. I just love like their dynamics and their stories that were told not only in comic books but in like I just, like I said, the Justice League animated series and all that stuff. I loved a lot. When Zack Snyder's Justice League came out, it showed like some of the new guys. Like there's Darkseid, Granny Goodness, and Darkseid's right hand man, Desaad. So I was like seeing like, are we gonna get like Mr. Miracle and like Orion? Like, but like honestly, that got scrapped. And I was excited because like there was a New Gods movie in the works with
Really?
the lady who did that Martin Luther King movie. Was it Selma, something like that? And she did really good movies. But like it was her and Tom King were co-writing the New Gods movies essentially. And I was like, what? So I was like super excited, but then it got canned. So I was like,
I didn't even know that existed. I've heard. I was looking today because I bought the absolute edition of DC Frontiers, and
okay, nice.
I've never read the New Gods, and I saw the Absolutes, and I was like, okay, I can't buy this, but I need to. I need to. There's so much I need to read, but
yeah,
that one's one that always catches my eye.
And like I have the first absolute of the original New Gods from by Jack Kirby, and it's like I usually just open up, just like look at the artwork because Jack Kirby's artwork is like phenomenal in and of itself.
Yeah,
and I read that series like maybe like 3-4 times. I just love it. There's like I know that other writers did it, like Jerry Conway did a run on it, and like other writers did it. I read Orion by Walt Simonson, like I just said, Mr. Miracle, Tom King, and I just want more. I want more like of New Gods. Yeah. And like there's like always like a joke with like myself or like saying like I say like, hey, James Gunn, you should probably cast me as one of these characters. It'll be kind of cool.
It'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just love the characters so much, and they're like just awesome.
Just awesome. That's the perfect way to describe your favorite character. Mine, Spider-Man. It's not even really close. It's always been Spider-Man. Spider-Man's what got me into all this, and I mean, there's just so I can't even start, like, it's hard to even put into words. There's Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, the movies. Then you got PS4 games, one of my favorite games of all time.
Oh yeah.
They just dropped a little trailer for the second one, which is pretty
I did see that. That was cool.
And then there's also the comics. I mean, Ultimate Spider-Man. I mean, it's by far my favorite Spider-Man comic. But then there's Kraven's Last Hunt. There's, it's hard to even. There's just so much good Spider-Man.
Yeah, like there's like an enormous amount of like great Spider-Man comics, especially the original ones. Even the original ones are the one by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. I read the first omnibus of that, and even though it's obviously dated because it's like early mid 60s of dialogue, but it's still so good. It is still very, very good. And it's very interesting seeing like the original origin of Spider-Man and the original origin of like all of his like the villains, his rogues gallery. It's great, and like he's like such. I don't know any kid who hasn't grown up with Spider-Man at one point of their lives. And he's just like, iconic. It's
it can be considered a basic answer, but he's popular for a reason. He's easily relatable. It's Spider-Man. I mean, I think he has the most fun superpower out of any character. Like, I think Green Lantern is up there, but just swinging from the New York, I mean, that's just the coolest thing ever. It's
like swinging, climbing up walls, jumping. I mean,
it's just the coolest powers
if you
ever.
haven't, if you're like in a pool and you haven't like clung onto like the side of the wall, pretending you're Spider-Man, like on the side of like a building, then like you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, you aren't living. And then there's so much like good. Actually, I don't want to say recent because the recent Spider-Man stuff has sucked.
It sucked. Bad.
But the recent stuff before the recent stuff, like like Spider-Verse, Superior Spider-Man, so good. Like it's so I just love so many. There's so many different takes. Like obviously now with Spider-Verse, there's 5 billion different Spider-Men, and they're all interesting.
Right.
There's Miles, there's Spider-Gwen, so when I say Spider-Man, I mean Peter Parker, Miles Morales. Like it's crazy how much Miles Morales, he's almost surpassed Peter for me in some ways. He has. Peter's obviously always going to be my favorite because he's the original, grew up with him. But Miles is just so I think it's the best, like, I don't want to say copy of a character, but copy of a character that's ever been done.
That's true. Yeah. And like all like the Spider-Man variants, a bunch of them have their own like has either had or have their own comic series, like Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Gwen, Miles Morales, Peter Parker, Scarlet Spider, Spider-Man 2099, Superior Spider-Man. Like it's hard to say that like Spider-Man is not like a good character with like all these different variants of the same character having like multiple successful runs. And like saying like Spider-Man's like not a good character, he's a lame hero. It's just like
liar.
Where? Like, where are you getting this like thought?
You can't even label that as a hot take. That's just a lie.
It's a joke at this point. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's my top 3 for sure.
Awesome.
We'll get into the other ones at some other point, but
yeah.
I guess to end it, I say we talk about some of our favorite stuff we read in 2022 and also kind of the future of the podcast. Obviously this is the first episode, so what we want to do going forward, some segments, some stuff like that. So what were some of your favorite comics you read in 2022?
Let me pull up my list. I have a list. I kept track of everything. Let's see. Here it is. All right. So I logged everything from last year. Do you want to do like top 5 or top 3 or
whatever you want to do? You can just list some out. You can whatever you want to do. All yours.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna start from like 10 and then go on from there.
Okay.
So number 10, I got New Superman from DC Rebirth.
Okay.
Long Halloween, Nightfall, Justice, Batman Noel, Animal Man Volume 1, Beta Ray Bill, Fantastic Four by Mark Waid, JSA by Jeff Johns, and Royal City by Jeff Lemire.
Okay. All right. I've got my 10, so I'll say them as well, and then we can talk about, because I got one of mine that's on yours. I got Avengers Forever, not the 90s one, but there's a current one. It's kind of like a multiverse Avengers story. It's a really fun read. It's got high points. It's got some low points, but it's a fun read. Crisis on Infinite Earths, Batman Nightfall, also on yours. Symbiote Spider-Man, Shang-Chi by Jean Louis. Actually, I'm not even gonna attempt it. But it's a more recent Shang-Chi comic. Batman / Superman's World's Finest, Moon Knight by Jed MacKay, Ghost Rider by Benjamin Percy, and then the next two are they're like leagues away from the other ones. How much I love them. It's Thor by Jason Aaron and Invincible.
Those are two very good combos.
I love 10 through 3, but those two just kind of like they're they're way. I enjoyed them. Like they're probably going to end up being two of my favorite comics of all time. That's how much I love them.
I mean, Invincible is like I wasn't I was reading the final compendium when like the season, like the show is being announced, and I was
Really?
like excited, super excited, and I was like, and I finished it, and like it ends on like such a perfect note too.
Perfect. Dude,
And that's hard to come by. It's hard to come by.
dude, yeah, like I think it'll never be my favorite comic of all time, but I think from start to finish, it's the best written comic I've ever read.
Yeah, it's very consistent.
But I saw the first season, and I actually didn't even like it that much, which
Okay.
I guess that's a hot take too. But I didn't really like it that much. But something about the world like really interested me.
Mhm.
Like, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna read this, and then I got through the what's in the show, and I was like, okay, like I knew it was gonna happen, obviously.
Right.
There's some deviations, but still mostly the same thing. But once I got past that, dude, I couldn't put it down. Like it's so good. Like there is not one part I think that I would say I didn't enjoy.
Mhm.
I just enjoyed it from start to finish.
Yeah, and it gets like intense, and during some aspects too, like crazy, like intense, and like they do stuff like where like Marvel and DC would never do, or if they do, if they would do that, they like retcon it or like brush over it, but like they do it and like it stays like there, and like it stays. It's like a lingering aspect of like the huge consequence of whatever it happened, and that's something that I appreciated a lot from Robert Kirkman when he wrote it. It was great.
Dude, I tell people, and I hate to be like the guy that's like, I've read it and I try and be like, oh, like wait till you see. So I try not to do that. But when I've had a couple of people ask me like, oh, you read it, like how was it? I was like, if you think season 1 is crazy, like I swear you have seen literally nothing, dude. Like I was like, it only ramps up from here. And they were, asking me how. I was like, I'm not going to tell you. And there's going to be changes, and I think that's good. Like for example, in the first season, that detective dude, he's nowhere in the comics. That like demon detective guy.
Oh yeah, Dark Blood, something like that.
Or
I
is
think
he?
so.
He might be in it for like a second.
He was there for a little bit. He was
Yeah.
in the series for a little bit, or in the first season a little bit. Yeah,
I think he's in the first season like a lot more than he's in the books. It was a while since I've read the first volume, but he's like barely there in the comics, and
yeah.
yeah, it's just. But Batman Nightfall, that's one that's on both of our lists. What did you read volumes 1 through 3, like the whole?
I only read the first omnibus, Nightfall.
Okay.
I didn't read
It gets
Knight's
worse.
Quest. It does. No.
It gets
That's
worse.
probably why. That's probably why. I heard a lot. It gets like super 90s, super like crazy. And for like Knight's Quest and Knight's End. But it's like, I just like like Bane as a villain. Like I always I always understood like Bane's like a physically imposing villain, but he's like super like tactically like
Dude,
intelligent.
Yeah.
It's like
so
crazy.
smart in that. Yeah.
And like how he's just like just chilling while like Batman's taking down like all of his rogues gallery that's like running around Gotham, and he's getting sick, he's getting tired, but he has to keep pushing. He's pushing Batman to his like, extreme limit. And then when he goes home, that's where he beats him.
Yeah,
and, like I think that I thought that was like super like interesting. Like I had such like a menacing like villain for like Batman to have, and like even after he gets like his back broken, he gets Jean-Paul Valley to become the new Batman, but he's like super like violent, brutal. He like wants to kill, and it's like the whole aspect of that is just like super interesting. And I loved not only like the '90s aspect of like the Batman finding his like rogues gallery and Bane just like watching him in the sidelines, waiting for him to be like dwindled down to like very fatigued state Batman, and it's like Sean Palm Valley taking up the mantle of the new Batman. Essentially, I thought was great. Now, as you said, I heard a lot of people say Night's Quest, Night End, not that good, but I've always wanted to read those just to see like the conclusion of like that huge Batman Nightfall saga.
I think it's definitely worth reading. Like I don't like Volume 2 that much, but I think it's like still worth reading because it's really interesting seeing Azrael as Batman or John.
Mhm.
The suit he wears is so cool. Like
Oh yeah,
that alone makes it worth
all
it.
like the
But
claws, the sharp edges. It's great.
in volume 3, when Bruce comes back, it has some of my favorite Batman moments ever. Like
Mm.
him coming back to Batman, and like there's a moment where he's on top of a building, and usually he would just swing, use the grapple or whatever, swing, and he wouldn't think about it. But he hesitates, and he's like, I'm not ready for this. Usually I
Mm.
would do this so freely, but now, I'm not ready for it. I'm
Right.
nervous. And so it's really him training to become Batman again I really like volume 3 a lot.
Wow. Yeah. No,
So
definitely have to finish it. Yeah.
it's volume 2 is kind of a slog, but it's
Mm.
overall it's great.
Awesome.
Um, but yeah, I mean, those are my top 10. I'm sure those are pretty much all the ones I'll reread, and we'll probably eventually talk about on here.
Yeah.
So I no
Oh
need
yeah,
to go
definitely.
super into them, but I guess we'll just talk about now, like what we're gonna do in the future. Because yeah, well, we've talked about a lot of segments.
Hmm.
I came up with cover of the month. I think monthly we can show off a really cool cover that we love.
Definitely.
Because my favorite part about comics is the art. A good story is, always great, but nothing beats some badass comic art.
That is very true. The artwork will make or break the comic book. It doesn't matter how like beautifully written, masterfully written the comic is. If it has bad art, no one's gonna pick it up.
Agreed. That's a topic I could talk about all day, like art versus story, like which one's more important. But long story
Mhm.
short, I agree. I think if the art's not good, at least for me, because art's obviously always,
Yeah.
subjective or whatever. But if it's not good for me, it's hard for me to read it all.
Yeah. And like I know like for like DC Absolute Editions, they have like a good amount of DC stories that are not good. They're like not good stories, but they made it into like Absolute Editions just because of like the art.
Yeah,
I know. Well, I know. All Star Batman and Robin, I think, has an Absolute Edition. The story's terrible, but the
I've
artwork
never
is
read it, but
It's Jim Lee artwork, so like obviously it's got to be like an
yeah,
Absolute Edition. So like there's like it'll make money because people will just buy it only for the artwork. No one's gonna buy a terribly drawn comic book and
and absolutely,
read it.
yeah, exactly. One we've already done is the hot takes segment. I think every now and then, it won't be like every
Yeah,
episode, but every now and then throw out some hot takes, talk about it. An idea I had at 3 a.m. the other night was talk about crossover comics. I think there's some of the
definitely.
coolest things in comics that I never hear much about. There's we're just talking about Invincible. There's a crossover between Spider-Man and Invincible that I
I
don't
read
think
that.
many
It's so
people.
good.
Yeah, dude, not a lot of people know about it, but they're just really fun. I love, just
Yeah,
stuff like that. And then you can talk about the Wheel of Comics. That's your idea.
yeah.
That's your thing.
So obviously, if any of you has been on TikTok and seen my content, not as of right now because I haven't really done Wheel of Comics as of lately because I kind of like dropped that off a little bit because I never really had the time. But I did do this series called Wheel of Comics where I have like a bunch of different comics on this wheel. I spin it, and whatever it lands on is what I read and review. So that's definitely going to be a segment that we're going to do on this podcast. We already have 10 stories in line, so just stay tuned for that. I'm very excited for that one. Also, to coincide with any new comic book, movie, TV shows, video games, whatever, anything new is coming out on like the big screen, small screen, and video game screen. We'll talk about the characters, see if there's any reading recommendations that will tie into the movies and the inspiration the movies pulled from the comic books, all that type of stuff. I know we're going to do something with Ant-Man, Quantumania,
Yeah,
with Kang the
for
Conqueror,
sure.
because this is going to be his first on-screen appearance of King the Conqueror with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. So that's going to be a video for the future. And I'm excited for that one because it's going to be very interesting.
I've already been we already picked out what we're reading. I guess we'll save it for the episode itself, but I've already been reading it. We got some stuff I'm going to read just me, some stuff you're going to read just you, and then 12 issues that we're going to both read and talk about. But I've already been reading, and everything I'm
Yeah.
reading so far I love. So I'm
Mm.
I'm already getting pumped for it, man.
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I always like predicted that Kang was gonna be like the next big villain for like the next saga of Marvel, because like I don't know why it always made sense to me that it would be King, because the Avengers time traveled. Who hates people time traveling? King the Conqueror. So
Yeah.
like it kind of like it fits. It perfectly fits, and like a lot of people wanted like Galactus or like Annihilus, and I really don't see them as like the Thanos level threat. They do have the potential to be that with like Annihilus, and like if you read like Annihilation, yeah, it does pose that enormous threat, but that's more of like a cosmic, like Guardians of the Galaxy, Nova Corps type villain essentially. For Galactus is more of like a Fantastic Four villain.
Yeah,
Um,
he's gotta come with the Fantastic Four.
yeah, and like him, I don't know how they're gonna translate that into movies, but just having Galactus as a Thanos level threat didn't really make sense to me, because he's more centered into like Silver Surfer and the Fantastic Four.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Kang's gonna be a lot of fun
Oh yeah,
because I think they can really he might deviate the most from like the comics. Like
hmm
I guess we'll talk about this more in episode 2, but I think they're really gonna change him up from what we've seen in the comics.
definitely.
I think he's just gonna be a lot of fun. Jonathan
Yeah,
Majors
I'd
is a
agree.
great actor, so
I'm
it's gonna be
excited.
great. But yeah, I mean, I think you could even do. We pick 10, 5 each, for the Wheel of Comics. You could do that on your TikTok. You could spin it to decide
No,
what
yeah, that's
what
true.
run we start um reviewing, because that's another thing that I think will be a lot of fun is just like reviewing longer runs. Maybe like each episode we can review either 6 or 12 issue arcs and just talk about
hmm
it. We can recommend it, say it sucks or say it's really good. We can show off like art on, if you're watching on YouTube or whatever, on the screen, or if you're just listening, we'll talk about it, the art itself. But um, yeah, I love like Invincible. Like I love like just a good long run from beginning to end. Those are my favorite
Yeah,
type of comics. So I think those will be fun to talk about, whether we're rereading it or reading it for the first time. I think that'll be
oh, yeah,
a lot of fun to do.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited to see, because like I'm very indecisive when it comes to comics, because there's like a lot of comics I really want to read. So doing the whole wheel thing, it's just like it's very helpful. Even though like granted, like I'm kind of guilty of like spinning the wheel, it lands on something. I was like, let me press it again.
One more time.
one more time. So I was like, this solidifies whatever we're reading. If it lands something that I don't want to read, too bad. We're still reading it. We're reviewing
Yeah.
it. I
And
know
then
there might be one comic on the list that you might have some like ill feelings of towards, but we're still reading it. Am I correct?
yes, there is one. There is one. I was If it lands on it, we'll talk about it, because that's also another. That's like I think might be my biggest. No, it's one of my biggest hot takes. So I'm gonna save that for the future.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess the last thing I'll say is that, just to like bounce off what you were saying, I stream on Twitch, and streaming on Twitch has like broadened my gaming horizons by like so much. Like I've come to love so many different video games that I never would have tried if it wasn't
Right.
for streaming. Like I'm streaming the Dark Souls games right now. I never would have played those games if it would have just been me on my couch. And I think
hmm
this podcast will be a lot of the same. Like there will be a comic that I probably would have never read that we'll read together, and I'd be like, wait, damn, that was awesome. Like I'm so glad. So
Yeah.
that's probably the thing I'm most excited for going forward.
Yeah. I'm excited for this whole podcast to expand and blow up essentially.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this earlier. For the other wheels, maybe people leave their recommendations in the comics. We put that in the wheel. People are able to
Definitely.
kind of pick what we read, or help us decide. So definitely,
Yeah.
like interacting with the community is always super fun.
Yeah. And whenever that does happen, we can always pull up a poll, or
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah,
just like to like comment whatever stories you guys want us to read and review, and whatever has like the most likes or whatever, we'll input that one in the wheel, and then so on and so forth. Because I feel like with the audience chiming in and to like giving like their recommendations. There's a lot of people who like read like more obscure comic books that I'm interested in because like I love independent short stories, like self-contained, all that stuff. So we're kind of opposite in that part. But it'd be interesting, like kind of diving into like the longer runs of everything, and like the more niche like runs in comic books. So I'm really excited about that.
Me too. Yeah.
Awesome. So with that being said, is there any final thoughts you'd like to say or any final inputs?
Not that I can think of, man. I mean, I know we're gonna do an impromptu second episode tomorrow for the DC stuff. By the time this is out, I think we're gonna try and drop them at the same time or something like that. So
yeah,
I guess for listeners, me saying this won't matter, but I'm super excited to see what James Gunn has in store. So yeah.
Me too. So with that being said, if you could follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on TikTok, Orion Scott Comics. And where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Woody307TTV, I think is my Twitter, and then Woody307 on Twitch. And then we've already got the Twitter made for the podcast. We'll at some point make a TikTok and other stuff. So yeah. For now, follow us on Twitter at ComicsRTW, right? I
think so. Yeah. So follow those accounts. Twitter. I think we won't have the Twitter one, right?
Yeah, I think it's just Twitter right now. We'll eventually make TikTok and more. And once we do,
so make sure to follow the Twitter to keep a lookout on any updates we got. All right.
Yeah.
We don't have a cool outro yet, but we'll figure it out soon.
We'll get one of the as we go. We'll get cooler stuff like that. For now, we don't have anything cool. But
yeah.
All right.
With that being said, take it easy, guys.
Peace.